Good afternoon, and welcome to Boards and Bits, a webinar program of GAMA, the Tabletop Game Association. I'm David Abelson, the Education Manager for GAMA, and I'm here with today's speaker, but before I introduce him, I would like to share that due to communication snafu and some unexpected traveling, Danielle Reynolds, who is scheduled to speak here today, will not be joining us. We certainly wish her well. We'll get Danielle on sometime in the new year, I'm sure. With me is Pat Marino. Pat is a game designer and the director of hobby games at the Op. In his current role, he evaluates new game titles to strategically plan the hobby game rollout, which includes design, development, and a lot of inventor relations. Welcome, Pat.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Well, I understand that you're going to go ahead and talk to our viewers about designing games as products. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Well, then I'm just going to get out of your way and let you get to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have fun.
All right. So as David said, the topic for today is designing games as products, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a moment. And as he said, I am director of hobby games at the Op. For those maybe not familiar with the Op games, formerly USAopoly, our biggest hits currently Flip 7 and Tapple, which are absolutely on fire right now for us. But we also have a pretty extensive party game line with things like Q's and Q's, Telestrations, and games like that. And then more recently, in the last 5 or so years, we've dabbled a little bit more in the hobby strategy game space. I started at the company as a game designer and developer and sort of worked up to now leading one of the product lines. And some of our recent releases under that line are Avatar, Aang's Destiny, Fountains, T-Witches, and then we've also got a really great slate of games coming next year that we're very excited about that'll roll out across 2026. So that's just a little background. David gave a really great summary of what I do. It's a lot of inventor relations. It's a lot of scouting for the next great product. And a lot of that is going to be very relevant in today's conversation because there's a lot of things I did and thought about as a game designer before my time at the Op that didn't integrate thinking about games as products and the business side of it. And I've learned a lot more about that importance as my time has gone on, and I want to share some of that with you all. So the first thing I always do with these kinds of conversations about business and game design is talk about getting past the ick. Realistically, making games is a lot of fun, sometimes a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. Playing games is certainly fun. Being super optimistic about what your game is going to do and awards it might win and how much money it might make is great. But when you actually get into the numbers and the business side and the reality of making games, it's not always fun. That's sort of just the reality is sometimes, we talk about folks on our staff, we call the dream crushers, where we get really excited about something and then we start to do the analysis of it from a financial, sensible, commercial value standpoint, and it starts to not work so much, and we have to kind of let go of some of those things a lot. And I think that designing a game as a product really requires the designer to have a business mindset and to think of the game as more than just something really cool that you're personally excited about, and start thinking about it in terms of other people, in terms of retail placement, in terms of how much it's going to cost, how much the marketing is going to cost, and things like that. So we'll get into some of the weeds of that as we go through. And the first thing I kind of want to get at here is the idea of what is a product versus a game. Products in the game space are also games, but there's a way you can make a game just to make the game you want to make. And then there's a way to make a game to think of it from a commercial viability standpoint. This is a game that other people will spend money on, and thinking about who those people are and how much money they're going to spend and why they're going to spend it. And a lot of those factors really influence how you as a designer will craft and edit the product, the gameplay, the experience, the components as you approach that, putting a thing on a shelf somewhere at a retail store. All right, so the main thing here to sort of kick off then is, what's your goal, right? As a game designer, what do you think is your goal? What would you count as success? And depending on what your answer to this question is, the amount of product focused thinking you need to have is different. So starting on the left here, if your goal is just to make a game, like you just want it to exist and you want to be able to play it with your friends, and maybe you'll just make one copy, or maybe you'll throw it up on Kickstarter and you just want other people to get it. And you're not worried about profit, you're not worried about long-term retail placement. You just want it to exist for the satisfaction of taking something you created and seeing it out in the world. Then a lot of the product stuff is a little bit less important. It's more about the craft, the art, the experience of what is it you as an individual designer want to have exist in the world, and you can focus solely on that. I often sort of compare this to the film industry, right? If you want to make a sort of off-the-wall art film, you're not going to expect it to be the next blockbuster movie in every AMC in the country. But if you want to do that, then there are certain choices you have to make along the way to go after that big money type of production. So sort of the next step then is, if you just want to make a profit, you want to get the thing out into the world, and you would like to get some money back in your pocket for all of the effort that you're putting into making that thing and putting it out into the world, at least short term, then you might be thinking like, okay, I'm going to do a game for a narrow audience that's going to go on Kickstarter. It's going to have one campaign. The people who want it will buy it. I'll have enough of a markup that I'm satisfied with some money coming my way, covered all my costs, and move on. And then if you're really on the far end on the right end of the spectrum there of, I want to make a living at this, I want this to be my career, then you really have to start thinking sort of, what is an evergreen product that will continue to sell year over year? What is a product that reaches a very broad audience and, has that potential to reach mass market? And what's going to make it stand out in that space? What's going to make it appeal to the buyers who decide what products go on those shelves, so that it continues to pay you royalties and then gets your name out there, so you get more game contracts and so on. So the product decisions for each of these different categories are very different. If you want to make a living and have a game go broad, you're not going to design a $300 bespoke 6-hour complex game. And if you want to make something that is just for you and your friends, then you're not so worried about what the average Walmart Target consumer might be thinking. So one of the things I recommend to designers at the start of the process is something we do internally at the app, which is creating a product brief to sort of describe what is it you're making, and then use that as a constant reference point for the development process. We do this because, as a product goes through our life cycle, it goes between many teams: development, art, marketing, sales, and so on. And we want to make sure that there's a uniform understanding of what this thing is and who it's for. So our product brief is pretty extensive multi-page document, but kind of hitting on what some of the highlights are that I think developers should consider is, what type of game are you making? What are the mechanics of it? What is the complexity? What is the theme? Big picture, what is it? For us, a lot of times this comes straight from an inventor who's pitching us a game. They've already established these pieces. And then we're going to look at, okay, based on what's presented there as the type of game it is, who is it for? One of the things I see a lot in inventor relations is people sending in games and saying, it's for everyone. And the reality is there is no game for everyone. We can sell millions of units of Flip 7, and there are still people on Board Game Geek who don't like it at all and are happy to tell us that in their reviews and comments, right? It's just not realistic to say this is a game for everyone. And oftentimes by trying to appease everyone, you sort of alienate the potential for having a core solid fan base that will celebrate and love that thing. Because in order to sort of appease group B, you've taken out something that would have appealed to group A, but the game that you're presenting to group B isn't really their favorite thing. It's just a thing that group A likes that you've tried to modify for them, right? And so trying to figure out, what is my audience and how do I design a thing specifically for them? And also knowing that is going to guide marketing process and sort of forecasting and a lot of other things that we're going to talk about based on the size of that audience. And then a big part of product versus game for me is the hook and the why. What is it that makes this product special? in a way that will stand out from 5,000 other brand new games coming out in the same year and will make it move off of retailer shelves? And what makes that marketable? Sometimes I'll ask an inventor, what do you think is the hook of your game? What makes it special? And I'll get back 2 paragraphs. And for me, that's maybe a great review piece of like someone describing the game. But a hook is something that really can be articulated in a sentence or 2 at most, something that a consumer might take from that game and repeat to their friends when their friends say, "Oh, I heard you played that game. What was it like?" And what is that one sentence they're going to tell their friends that's going to get them excited about it? And my go-to example for this is always when The Crew came out, the hook for that game was it's a trick-taking game, but it's cooperative. So it's something you know and are familiar with, but with this twist that kind of makes you stop and go, how does that work? I want to try that. I want to experience that. That sounds different. That sounds exciting. And it sounds approachable. And then what is the experience? And for dev, this is a huge one for us is what is it that we want the players to think, feel, see, and do? What is that experiential product that they're taking home with them? And how do we make every development decision in a way that emphasizes that? So recently we put out a game called Fountains. And one of the things we kind of did early on when we got the game from the inventor was we had this discussion of the pitch document, the rules, the setup, everything is telling me I'm supposed to experience this game in a particular way where each decision I'm making is allowing me to think about what's good for me, what's good for my opponents, and how do I stop that from happening, and how do I block the next player from getting a thing that they might want. And I want to be able to do all those things in about 10 seconds, very quickly make that decision. And there was an element to the game that was making understanding those 3 things that a player was supposed to be able to do. It would make it take almost 2 minutes just to figure out like what the choices were on a turn. And then from there to sort of analyze like which of those choices were good and bad. And so we had to do a lot of development with that part of the mechanic to sort of say, that's not the experience we want players to have. It's too slow. It's not snappy. It's not transparent what the choices are and what the values and the decisions are behind them. So how do we streamline that in a way that you can very quickly look at the state of the board and go, if I do this, this is better than that. But it might also create an opportunity that's really good for the next player. So I don't want to give them that and then make a choice. So we focused a lot of the development on streamlining the complexity of that decision in order to emphasize the experience we wanted players to have. And we wanted it to be a snappy game. We didn't want it to be an all afternoon type of complex game because the audience we had in mind was that sort of gateway gamer that might shop at Target for their next hobby game, but they might occasionally drop into a game store and see what's on the shelf. So we wanted to kind of bridge that gap. All right, so when we get into designing a game as a product, one of the things that comes up a lot is this idea of managing expectations. Again, sometimes, especially with newer designers who maybe don't know the industry as well and things, we get these grandiose ideas of being the next giant hit and making a fortune and, retiring to a mansion somewhere and being a rich game designer. And we have to kind of step it back and say, okay, but what's realistic? Like, yes, we all want to win the awards. We all want to have, a game that sells 1 million+ units a year and is evergreen and does all those things. But depending on what you're designing and how you're presenting it as a product, those expectations just might not be realistic. Take like a Vital Lacerda game. They're known for being complex. They're expensive. They're big and bulky. And they're done that way on purpose and designed as a product on purpose for an audience that likes that kind of game. But the expectation there is not that they're going to create that big, heavy game and it's going to go on every Walmart shelf in the country and sell, 50 units a week at every store. It's just not a really realistic expectation because that product doesn't present for that kind of growth and market share. And by the way, if folks have questions as I'm going through this, feel free to put them in chat and they'll share them with me and I'll try to answer them as we go. And then there'll be a Q&A at the end as well. So we'll have some more time to address any questions you might have. So part of product is knowing the market and knowing your audience. And so as you're designing a product, you really have to know what other games are out there in the market that are similar. How did those games perform? And what about your game is different? What is the hook that makes it special? Sometimes it's like, oh, my game is a lot like fill in the blank. Like my game is a lot like Catan, but it's so much like Catan that anybody who knows Catan, which is most gamers, are satisfied that they have Catan. They're not looking for another thing that is very, very similar to it because this massive hit has a huge part of the market share and already does the thing that your game does. So that's a tricky thing to try to compete with. But if you have something that it's like, well, my game is similar to several other games, but it does things differently or better than those games do, and there's a way that I can present that with a marketing hook, there's a space for it in the market. Sometimes we'll even look at a game and say, this is similar to all these other things, but one of the elements we really have to focus on is what is the art style? What is the design? What is going to make this one look and feel different from those other games to kind of emphasize to the consumer that this is a different product than the one they already have. Because if, there's the trap of like, well, everyone likes this artist and the expectation is that all of the nature games look this way and kind of play this way. And so my game is a nature game and it needs to do that. But for the, casual audience, they might look at that and go, oh, is that the game we already played? I think we've played that one. It looks similar, or we already have a game just like that. We don't need another one that is exactly the same. So there's got to be a little bit of a point of differentiation, and knowing what's in the market is really important. It's also a case that sometimes we get pitch games from inventors that are almost clones of existing games, and the inventor just wasn't aware that someone already did that thing. So a lot of research required there. And then, as I've mentioned several times, like, who is the game for? How would you describe the type of people you picture not only playing your game, but bringing that game to other friends, championing it, being proud to own it, being one of the early consumers that's going to pick it up off the shelf? And sometimes we have this disconnect, especially working with a lot of intellectual properties and IPs where, we get pitched a game and it's like, oh, this is for fans of this thing. And one of the questions we ask is, well, do fans of that thing buy games? And if they buy games, do they buy this kind of game? Right. So it's like, okay, it's a My Little Pony game and it's a 4X 12-hour strategy game. Well, there's a disconnect likely between the audience who wants a, My Little Pony product and what they might be willing to spend and what kind of experience they're looking for from that product and the thing that is being presented and designed. So understanding that audience, how much they're willing to spend, and whether or not they're willing to spend that money on games is really important. And also knowing who it's not for is important because you kind of want to communicate that subtly through the way you present your game. Oftentimes I see things where it's, I've invented chess for people who hate chess. Well, the problem often with that is if I don't like chess, I'm not really looking for something that will convince me that I like something similar to chess. I've decided as a consumer, I don't enjoy that experience. I want to put my energy and attention somewhere else. And on the other side of that, you've taken people who love chess, you've presented something that fundamentally shifts some aspect of what they love about chess to try to make it appeal to a new audience. And they end up not liking it either because it breaks something that they like about the original game. So, you've kind of created a thing that's maybe not for anyone. So thinking about like, okay, my game is for this audience and not for this audience. And Ignacy Chevichek, who owns Portal Games, talked about this one time, is communicating who your game is not for also helps you avoid this idea of like the wrong consumer buying it, playing it, hating it, and then reviewing it, right? Like the last thing you want is, well, I tried to convince people that my game was for them, even though it wasn't. And then they played it and a bunch of them went to Board Game Geek and rated it a 2. And now that's dropping my average because I've tried to sell it to the wrong crowd and they didn't receive it well. And then the last piece of this is knowing the value proposition of your game. What is the cost versus the experience? Because this is going to inform a lot of your product decisions. If it feels similar in experience, complexity, time it takes to play to games that generally sell for $12.99 or less, then chances are your final product cost for a consumer should be $12.99 or less. it can be a real disconnect if it's like, well, it has the complexity and approachability and everything of Flip 7 or Uno, but it costs $89.99 to buy. Well, now I've got this very expensive thing that felt experientially very similar to a very cheap thing that I can get very cheaply. I'm going to go spend my dollars on the very cheap thing that gives me the same value of experience. It's sort of like if there was a new movie in theaters that was a hit and it was 2 hours long and it cost $20, and there was a new movie that was 2 minutes long that cost the same $20, you're probably going to go see the longer movie that's the better value for your spend because it aligns more with your expectations. The really gross part of the business side, I guess, is your financial analysis too. And I think a lot of designers don't always know enough about the behind the scenes. And I could do a whole presentation on this topic as well. And that's sort of analyzing what is the financials of creating the thing you're creating. And even if you're planning to pitch your game to publishers, thinking about it from their perspective is important. What are the resource costs to publish this game? Whether you're doing it yourself on Kickstarter or a publisher is taking it on, how much of their time and money is it going to take what you're presenting now as a game and turn it into a final product? That's going to take marketing dollars. It's going to take sales team pushing the game. It's going to take it going to conventions, developer time, artist and illustrator budgets. And then if you've got like really complex componentry, things that actually have some kind of function or mechanical element, you've got an electronic piece, the more of that stuff you add, the more R&D time goes into solving some of those challenges, and the more upfront costs are going to exist before anything actually hits shelves and starts bringing money back in. So all of that kind of needs to be considered as the product of like, could this game be made with a simpler apparatus to make it function as smoothly, which would cut back on that development time, working back and forth with a manufacturer to try to create the device, or whatever you've got included in it. If you've got a really toyetic element or something like that, is it adding enough value to the final product and enough necessity to justify those other costs? And is it doing all of that while keeping the final price point of the game where it needs to be? And then one of the things we always have to do, if I'm presenting a new game that I want to pursue and publish at the op, is what's the forecast? And, we look at how many of these do we realistically think will sell in the first year, and how many do we think will sell over the lifespan of the product? So if in a launch year, we're going to sell 20,000 units of this game, and then we think steadily for the next 4 years, we're going to sell 7,500 units a year over year. But about the 5th year, we think it's going to taper off, and that's going to be the end of it. Well, we want to look at all of that and look at our upfront costs to create this product and decide, is it worth it? Is there enough return on investment for our time to develop the amount of art necessary to make the game, to pay for that art? Is it going to justify adding more upgraded components and sort of having maybe a lower margin because we're going to sell higher volume over time because we've done that? And sometimes we look at it and say, well, the life expectancy is short. The initial forecast isn't super high. We're not really confident in it. It may not be worth the effort to go down that road because we're thinking of it as like, what is the potential reach of this as a final product based on who it's for, where it will sell, what it's going to cost, and all of those pieces. And this goes into, profit and loss documents, which, as a designer, you don't necessarily need to create, but if you're going to self-publish, you absolutely should be doing this, which is, start with, okay, I've got this vision. My game it's a light strategy gateway game. It plays 1 to 5 players. It's gonna be in a box about this size to hold all the components. It's similar to other games on the market that cost $39.99. So I think that's a price that consumers are generally willing to pay for the type of experience that I'm providing and the type of art and componentry I'm going to be showing them. So I've got my ceiling. It's $40. That's what this game should retail for. Now, working backwards in a $40 game, like what do players expect to see in terms of components, the level of art, the type of game they're getting, the value of the experience, how long that game lasts, and those kinds of things. And then what will it actually cost you to promote the game, to produce the game, distribute the game, and is there any margin available left in that? And if not, oftentimes we start to look at like, maybe there is as much margin as I'd like, or there's some margin, but I'd like it to be higher. Now I got to kind of dial back and look at, are there things I can alter about the product design from a component count standpoint, from the materials I'm using, from the amount of unique art that needs to be paid for in the game? Like, what are the things I can adjust to get that overall picture to look the way I need it to look? Because it's very easy to get carried away, especially in a crowdfunding culture of like, I'm going to upgrade this, we're going to have deluxe that, there's going to be 17 expansions, and suddenly your cost of manufacturing, your consumer cost to actually buy the thing starts to spiral kind of out of control, and you lose sight of like, what was the product I was trying to make? Was it just throw everything at the wall because it feels cool and I want to have a lot of stuff because it feels good to have all that stuff in the game as the designer? Or is it like, no, I'm building something for a long-term retail approach, which needs to have a sort of fixed price point that can perform well in a brick and mortar store and have a built-in margin for a distributor, a retailer, and the original publisher to all get a cut of the money and still be profitable and successful. So there's a lot of elements that need to be considered there depending on what kind of product you're going to make and who it's for and where it's going. And then in terms of designing the overall product, we talk about this idea of you're selling an experience, right? So it's not just here's a box, have fun. It's what is the experience from a consumer standpoint from the first time they see your game on a shelf in a store? Like, what does that box top look like? What are they seeing? How is it presented? Or if they're seeing it online and sometimes a very small thumbnail, does it communicate? You know, you've got this gorgeous artwork, it's all complex and intricate, and then it gets shrunk down to, you know, Amazon or Game Nerds or whatever, a little thumbnail, and it loses all of that beauty and just kind of becomes a muddled mess. You know, that's somebody's first impression of the product. And then are there resources for this product to learn more about it through reviewers, content, marketing? And really important one is box bottom, which I'll talk a little bit more about. You know, how are they experiencing that early? I don't own it yet, but what can you tell me about it? And then when they get the game home, if they bought it and they unbox it, what is that experience? What do you see the first time you lift off the lid? What's underneath? You know, is it the rule book? Is it certain components you want to highlight? You know, what does it feel like to take all the stuff out of the box? And is that a satisfying, like, I feel like I got my value for the money I just spent? Because all of this takes your game and turns it into a product that people are hopefully very excited to have in hand and own. And then learning the game is part of the product experience. How do they learn the game? Are there videos? Are there resources online? You know, dice tutorials, things like that. Is the rule book clear? Is it approachable? Does it have, you know, nice graphics? What's the size of the rule book? You know, these kinds of product decisions can lead to somebody feeling very satisfied or somebody being really annoyed. You know, we had a great discussion with Rodney Smith of Watch It Played. You know, he does these great tutorial videos, and we said, what makes a great rule book? He reads so many rule books, like what makes a great one? And one of the things for him that like kind of stood out to us and it was a good point is oftentimes we tend to make the rule book the size of the box, right? Like we have the box is this big, so I can make the rule book that big. And the next thing you know, people have sort of this newspaper size thing. And he's like, you know, he's not always reading his rule book at the table where he can open it up flat on a surface. Sometimes he's sitting on a couch. You know, some people read rule books in bed, you know, hoping to learn it and get it down to play the next day, those kinds of things. And those big rule books can be kind of unwieldy. And even sometimes using the wrong paper. It's, you know, it's a great rule book, but it was really glossy. So the direct lights above my game table just made everything glare and it made it hard to read. So there's little product decisions there too, and the materials that are used for something as simple as a rule book that can oftentimes just making the right choice makes it not annoying, but making the wrong choice can really start somebody's first impression of getting into your game is like, well, now I'm kind of irritated. Like the rules weren't that clear. The rule book was hard to manage. So I'm already kind of starting my experience of what the gameplay is like with a sort of a ding in that book. And then, you know, the experience of I've learned the game, taught the game, we're playing the game, we have a question. How easy was it to find the answer to that question? Did we have to jump around? Did we have to go on Board Game Geek and ask and hope somebody in the forums could answer it? These things also diminish the overall experience with the final product that folks are going to sort of walk away going like, it was okay. You know, like they might not articulate, well, the problem was the rule book wasn't clear when we referenced it. It was just, they kind of walked away with a less than satisfied feeling because of some of those choices that were made there. and even customer service. Like, what is your interaction with people who've bought that product? If they're posting reviews, are you commenting on those reviews and thanking them for their time? Are you going on BGG and answering questions? Are you prepared to deal with folks who, have a broken component, a missing component, things like that, and provide really good quality customer service? Because that is also part of the product experience. Is like, I can be really excited about a thing I bought, and then by mismanagement of a customer service request, leave with a sour taste in my mouth that I might not then pursue other games from that publisher or that designer. And then packaging design. So this is big, really big, especially if you're selling primarily in hobby stores, but it can make a difference in big box retail too. The reason I kind of differentiate those is a lot of times a game that's selling at your major retailers like a Target or a Walmart, folks are often purchasing those games because they've played them with someone else, right? Like a lot of the Flip 7 sales we see, people are going to the store to buy Flip 7. They've already experienced it. Someone shared it with them. They heard about it online. And so they're not necessarily relying on the little tiny box top on the shelf to catch their eye and say, that's the game out of all these games I want. They're kind of already there because they wanted it. But if you think about like a casual gamer, or even an experienced gamer going to their favorite hobby shop, and there's, a million choices in that store, and they're trying to figure out what they want to pick up and look at, that box top can be the first introduction to what your game is. And part of it is having gorgeous art, something that just grabs people's attention, stands out on the shelf, has enough front facing to the size of the box to stand out. I've seen games in stores where, it's a little tuck box and it can just very much get lost in the mix. When Flip 7 first came out, we had it in a big box, and a lot of people kind of critiqued that and said, why is this box so big? And as a brand new game that didn't have any awareness when we first launched it, it went into like hobby and specialty stores. It wasn't going into mass market right off the bat. And we wanted enough front facing to that box to stand out on shelf and catch attention. So we made it a little bigger than it really needed to be to hold the cards. And then we had the promo version that was a little tuck box. That was great for giving out to consumers. It's great for keeping in your pocket and carrying with you, to share with friends. But from a retail product perspective, that's not a great thing to put on a shelf because it can get lost and it can get stolen fairly easily. So that's something we hear from some retailers as well. Is like that small packaging isn't always the best thing because sometimes the small packages vanish. So all of that goes kind of into what is your box top? What is the size of it? What is the art on it? How does it grab people's attention? And as I mentioned earlier, if I shrink it down to a thumbnail for online sales, how does it show up, in a small format? Can I still read the title? Is it still clear what I'm looking at in the art? Does it kind of stand out in a way that would grab someone's attention? And then box bottom is something that I think is done fairly well by most publishers, but sometimes there's examples where there's a miss on this. And when we talk to some of our hobby retailers, one of the best examples of this is we were talking with a store manager from Millennium Games in Rochester, New York, which is one of the biggest hobby stores in the country. And they were saying that all of their shelves, funnily enough, all the shelves in Millennium are former Blockbuster shelves. When Blockbuster went out of business, they scooped up all the shelves from the different Blockbusters. And the reason is they have a slight tilt to them, right? Like a slight angle and a little shelf like this because the videos used to sit on them. And so they're able to put all of their games front facing rather than sort of on end like books, and have them kind of sit facing out. So as you walk through the aisles, you can see all the different box tops. But one of the store managers was telling us that oftentimes they'll see games backwards on the shelf. And what they've learned is what happens is a consumer picks up that game. They're like, ooh, this art looks great. This is a good looking product. And they flip it over and the bottom of the box doesn't tell them what they wanted to find out about what kind of a game that is. And so they put it back. But of course, they picked it up, they turned it around, looked at the back. The back didn't satisfy their curiosity and they put it backwards. And oftentimes what they were saying is the games that were backwards didn't have a clear introduction to what was inside that box. So there's gorgeous artwork on the front. You flip it over, no idea what's in this box. I know it's a game, but beyond that, I don't really know what I'm getting into. So, an example here. So this is a game called My Life Be Like. And this is a game I got in Essen, and you can see the box bottom here. Like maybe this art grabs you, maybe it doesn't. There's certainly some preference that goes into it there, but sort of a clean illustrated style there. It's kind of unique. I haven't seen a game quite like this. It's very white, so maybe that'll jump out on the shelf because it's a simple illustration. But when you flip it over to the back, because they've got 3 different languages they've included here on this box bottom and a list of components, and they've got all their legal and their barcode and everything they fit on the bottom of this box, a consumer picking this up off the shelf might read this to learn what kind of game it is, but chances are that they're going to glance at this and go, I don't know what this is. Is there a game board? Is it cards? And while it's all listed here, you're asking the consumer to do a lot of work to figure out what is the product you're selling to them. What is this experience in this box? I really don't know. And so it's not well communicated there. One of the things we often do, yeah, exactly. Looks like a technical manual. One of the things we do with our product is all of this like required legal stuff we put on this panel of the box now, so that way we've added that much more space we have on our box bottoms to be able to communicate to a consumer, what is this? So taking an example of one of our own games, right? So here's Fountains that came out this year. You can see there's all that componentry, legal mumbo jumbo and stuff that we have to include on that panel. And what that did is it freed up all this space on the box bottom. And now you've got what we call a hero shot, right? That shows the whole game in process. You can see the types of components that you're getting here. It's displayed in a way that's like mid-game. You can kind of get a feel for what this would look like on my table, what kind of pieces I'm getting, what the value might be there. And then we do these call outs, and we tend to do them numbered. And that gives you like 3 quick points that basically tell you high level, how does this game work? And why is it fun, right? And so we try to include that, like this is part of the steps of the game, and this is the piece of that makes it appealing for you to play, and try to give folks the most approachable way to get into this. And when you're putting this in a retail store, especially a hobby store, which has informed staff who know about games, this is an opportunity they can use to explain this game to a consumer who says, hey, do you know anything about this one? They're like, yeah, I can tell you about it. And I don't need to go open a copy or have a demo copy to explain it to you. I can point to the pictures. I can use this as my visual aid to teach you what this product is and convince you to buy it. And then the last piece of packaging design that we look at sometimes is enhancements, right? There are things you can add to a box that will add cost, but can also add an eye-catching flair. So Bears versus Babies from Exploding Kittens, when they did that game, the outside of the box was furry. Our Glyphics game that just came out has plastic pieces in it. You used it almost like, if you think about macaroni art is always the example I give, like it's little plastic squiggly pieces you use to create art to communicate an idea to the other players. And the box top was actually designed to have those pieces embedded in it, so you can actually feel them. They're textured on the box. Didn't add a lot of cost, but it adds a lot of flair that helps a game kind of stand out on shelf. There's spot UV treatment, which adds gloss. There's foil. There's magnetic closures. There's all kinds of things you can add to the outside packaging that communicate value to a consumer, help elevate the overall feel of that product. But they add cost, and you have to kind of debate, is it worth it? And then oftentimes, if something about that enhancement communicates something about the game experience, it can be worthwhile to do that and see that as part of the overall product design. Is, what does it feel like, look like? What's the weight of it? What textures or elements on this box are making a consumer sort of fall in love with it as a product when they pick it up? It takes it that next step. And of course, very similarly, like componentry. As I mentioned earlier, in a Kickstarter era, crowdfunding, the temptation to upgrade everything is really there. We've done one big crowdfunding game under an imprint brand we used to have called Project Raygun, and the game was Court of the Dead Mourner's Call. And we kind of wanted to just experiment with what it was like to do crowdfunding and do, big strategy, dudes on a map type of game. And we kind of went down that rabbit hole. Let's upgrade everything. And one of the things we did was we put a lot of metals in the box, metal coins, metal tokens, things like that. At the end of the day, the metals that were in the game were 50% of our production cost. So everything else that was in the game, 70 miniatures, a giant game board, the vac trays, the box itself, the rules, lots of decks of cards, some of which had special treatments on them. All of that combined cost as much to make as a bag of metal pieces. And so our overall production cost was probably about double what it had to be if we'd used cardboard and other things like that. And we did it intentionally, as part of the product design to just kind of demonstrate what could be done and experiment with that. But if your long-term goal is, to have a game that's going to live on shelf at retail as a product that can reach a broad audience, that may not be the best approach, because of course that pushed our SRP much higher than it would have been otherwise. And in fact, a lot of that stuff we kind of downgraded for a retail version, which was still very expensive. I think we ended up at about $100 or $120 retail for the retail version, with some of that. And then more recently with T-Witches that came out this year, we did an upgrade kit for it. And one of the things we chose to upgrade was the T tokens in the game to translucent acrylics. And when we put those in, we had a lot of back and forth with the factory trying to get the colors right. We really dove into whether or not we could put a screen print pattern on those for making them easier to use for folks with color blindness, and also just helping differentiate them, make them sort of match the in-game card art and stuff, because each type of tea had a little texture to it. And the cost for doing all that kept going up and up and up and up, where these upgraded components would have cost more than the game. And so we ended up taking out some of those treatments and compromising a little bit on the colors. And sort of the feedback we got on this was these didn't need to be upgraded, and the way they were upgraded isn't worth the money. And the chip ones that come in the box are fine. And so, it's like in trying to meet that expectation that a lot of gamers have for this upgrade, we ended up creating still fairly expensive upgrades that didn't elevate the experience as much as they should have for the cost. And so my advice is always, if you're upgrading components in a game, is look at like what is going to have the biggest impact for you in terms of the upgrade. Where do you spend that money? What do players handle the most in the game? What do they have in front of them? What do they interact with? So if you have a deck of cards that, gets drawn from once every round and there's only 5 rounds of the game, upgrading the paper quality and the, doing a painted edge and a whole bunch of things to that deck of cards may not make as much sense as, if you've got money and it's constantly being exchanged between players multiple times per turn in order to kind of run the economy of the game, then maybe doing wooden coins or metal coins or plastics or something that makes that more tactile is going to add a lot to the value of the experience, and be worth it, because folks then feel like they have a great product that they're proud to own versus, something that's maybe all paper and cardboard, which feels maybe more disposable to a consumer. And that's the high level summary of everything I kind of wanted to address here. As developers, it's thinking about all these things, and you can even be prototyping with some upgraded components to kind of demonstrate to a publisher or a potential consumer, if you're going to crowdfund, like what this finished product could look like. Thinking about the art. This is one I meant to mention with Box Top, is a disconnect between art and game. And so, does the art communicate to the target audience the type of experience that it is? One of the traps I've seen here is like, overly cutesy art can communicate to an audience that this is a children's game. And I've had several hobby retailers tell me that they've actually talked consumers out of purchasing Root, because in talking to that consumer, they learned that like they were not at all experienced gamers, but they saw the art on the front of Root and they were like, these woodland creatures look cute. The design of this looks great. I want to play this. And they're like, okay, just so you know, each character, each player has a totally different rule set for how they play this game. So this is not an easy, approachable game, but something about that artwork and the sort of woodland creatures on the front communicated to a lot of consumers that this is an approachable, easy thing to dive right into, and you're going to have a great time with your casual gaming friends. And so there's a bit of a disconnect with that. And, sometimes talking to publishers, they'll say like, oh yeah, I've sold a lot of units of that. I'm curious how many of them got played, right? And even Jamie Stegmaier says this with Wingspan, is he knows there's a probably not insignificant portion of copies of Wingspan that were purchased because of the hype, because of the marketing, because of the placement at Target, and then folks got those home. It's like, oh, this looks fun and approachable, and they cracked open that rule book as an inexperienced gamer and went, whoa, there's a lot going on here, and then they put it back in the box and said, we'll get to that later. So all of that is important to consider when you're developing a product. Is, am I communicating who it's for? Am I communicating that clearly? Am I setting expectations? Am I making the experience approachable and easy to get into? Am I giving people the right upgrades that they want, and saving money and keeping the cost where they expect it to be? And how do I balance all those pieces? So with that in mind, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Looks like Benjamin's going to have a question, but in the meantime, I have a question.
Go for
it. Can you tell us about just a couple of the games that you personally have designed?
Sure. So since becoming director of hobby games, I've been more in the development side of things, as scouting games and working on other people's games and getting them over the finish line. But a few of the ones I've designed, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang's Destiny, and Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Fire Nation Rising game. I did both of those. I did Cuphead, fast-rolling dice game, which is a real-time, hectic, basically tries to recreate the stress and anxiety of playing Cuphead, the video game, in a tabletop experience. I often tell people, if you're not swearing at the game and then saying, well, one more round, you're not playing it right. Designed Mountains Out of Molehills, which is a game I designed with my brother that we published at the Op. Gem Hens was one of the first. I'm looking at my game collection here. Express Route. Die Hard was a co-design with Sean Fletcher, who used to work at the Op. And then I worked on a bunch of Hasbro product as well. And one of the fun things of being at the Op is with our Hasbro agreement, like, tell people you're a game designer and you get that, oh, like Monopoly. And I can say, yes, exactly. Like I have in fact designed IP versions of Monopoly and Risk and Clue and Yahtzee. Everything from JoJo Siwa Monopoly to Rick and Morty Risk, Warhammer 40,000 Risk, and everything in between. All right, so I see Owen got a question in there first. Where do you suggest someone newer to the industry starts looking to learn more on the cost analysis front? So the way I always tell people to approach this is like, yes, you could reach out to factories and you might get different quotes, but if you're not serious about going into contract with those factories, trying to take their time to have them cost out and give you an analysis of your game may not be the most accurate way to go about it. And it also, there's volume discounts, and then there's, the discounts that preferred partners get and lines of credit and all these other things that factor into it. Really, the best way to go about it is to look at other games and see what's in the box versus what the SRP of the game is. Now, you can get caught up in looking at like, what is this selling for right now? But that might not tell the whole story of, well, this game didn't perform well, so you're getting a great deal on the components because it's on closeout, because it's not moving, versus this game came out yesterday and has had 0 discounts. And they might have very similar components for different prices. So look at what the original like publisher suggested retail price of that game was versus what's in it. And then keep in mind that like volume will have some impact on that. So, Splendor, which has sold millions of copies, might get a little bit more in that box at their print volumes for that price than an indie game that maybe over its lifespan will print 5,000 games at best. So there's things like that. I mean, we print Flip 7s hundreds of thousands at a time, so they cost us a lot less for that deck of cards than we have a hobby card game coming out next year that has a few more cards than Flip 7, but not many. But because we're doing an initial much smaller print run, the SRP of that game will be higher because our cost to produce it is higher. But looking at games in market that are, similar to the expectations, like, oh, this feels like it's a hobby game that's about what I would expect my game to do in terms of volume. It has similar art, it has similar components to it, and it's selling for X price. That's probably a good ballpark. You don't really need to get into the weeds of each die costs X amount of cents, each card is Y, and try to figure it all out that way. But just have a ballpark in mind of what that is. All right. When a game designer is pitching to you, how much do you like to see some of the thoughts about opinions for components, art, other things you presented? It depends. We've seen everything from like T-Witches came as a package deal between Manny, who's the inventor, and Sandara, who's the artist, that came together. So we knew it was going to be Sandara Tang art. That was part of the deal, but we also love her art and she's amazing to work with. So like, that's great. Generally what we don't want to see from an art perspective is, because what was presented to us was sketches, right? Like placeholder art, sketches, it wasn't finished art. We had the opportunity to work with Sandara to develop the art the way we felt it needed to be for the product. Generally what a lot of publishers don't love to see is like a designer who's already paid for art and then expecting the publisher to use that art as is and then pay them back for it, because it takes the choice away from the publisher, who might have some different expertise on what the market will respond to in the product design. But having ideas of like what style you think, like, we've had that presented to us of like, I'm really envisioning like a Studio Ghibli kind of cozy style, or a, grungy, whatever, cyberpunk kind of thing going on. Like, we've had folks pitch to us with AI art just to sort of, and always with full disclosure, this is AI art. Please don't have any illusions of using it. We as a company would never publish anything with AI art, but if you're just trying to communicate like a vision, I think that's sometimes helpful for getting us excited about the game to kind of see where it might go or what it would feel like. Componentry, sure. Yeah. Especially sometimes, especially now, we get games with like 3D printed components and, like plastics and wood pieces and stuff with laser cutters. People have access to a lot of gadgets. But sometimes that can create a better emotional connection between the publisher and the game and create a better experience. We may ultimately choose to take some of those things out to get the price where we need to be. But it's your opportunity to kind of put your best foot forward as like, what do I envision as the best, coolest version of this game? And can I get people excited about playing that? But we've also done games where it was like somebody took the cards out of Ticket to Ride and then wrote on them and then like modified some stuff and like just used existing game components to cobble something together to get the idea across. And if that's fun with like no investment in art in components, then we know it's only going to get better when we do that. So it's pretty flexible. But if you have a vision, I think a lot of publishers are open to it, as long as it's not, this is the way and the only way, and you're not going to be flexible on that. Ooh, the most important thing I've learned in the last few months that I wish I would have known 3 years ago. This is an interesting one because we're exploring some shifting strategies at the op right now. So there's some pieces of that I can't really get into that would influence my answer to this question. But I think one of the pieces I've learned a lot more about in the last few months is a better understanding of the mass market buyers. So these are the folks who decide what goes on shelf at the big stores and what those consumers want. One of the things we've kind of found there is innovation isn't always the best thing in that space. Familiar with a twist, I think, is more important. And as designers who exist in the design community and often talk to other designers, I think there's a tendency to get impressed by really unique, off-the-wall, innovative things, but that doesn't always, as my boss would say, it doesn't play in Peoria. Like middle America, mass market consumer isn't maybe looking for the most innovative, award-winning, like indie, complex game. They're looking for like, I can teach this to grandma in a minute, and then everybody in the family is playing it together, and it was easy, and we all remember the rules next week when we played it again, and a month later when we played it again, and we can break those games out because there's an approachable, familiar element to it, but a twist that makes it different from something we've played before. So understanding that importance of like the sort of off the wall innovations that I get excited about as a designer and developer don't always translate into a big successful product because sometimes folks just aren't ready for it yet. Oh, side of the box design. Since many stores do side out, or spine out, logo on each side, logo horizontal on some sides. We try to provide, and this is a big thing our art director for Hobby does, and it kind of started a little bit because of my shelves, right? Like I color coordinate and I put spines out and all of that. So fountains is a good example. Here we've got one side where it's flat for those of you who stack in your calyx. You've got one side where it's spine, but horizontal. So, if you put your games like I do, the title still reads horizontal. And then we've got one that's the traditional vertical spine. So it's another, this, but now the game is upright. The tray inside is designed to hold everything so that it stands on end without spilling when you put it all together. And you can display it with a big title that's very clear here. Some folks will say they don't love our idea of using this spine because what if at the store that puts games this way, somebody puts it back this way? And it is a risk, right? Like this, if this is what's showing, that's not going to grab anybody's attention. But we take that risk of having that one side there in order to capitalize on having that much extra real estate. If you think about it, if I shave that much off the bottom of the box to put this information there, then I don't have all this real estate to show you like what's so great about this game. So we kind of, as a standard, try to do the variety. So no matter how you display your game, there's a side that works. We don't have currently like a brand standard in terms of like where those titles are placed or like where our logo has to go. In fact, the size of this one, only this side has an op logo on it. And then oftentimes with our logos now, especially on the hobby games and designer names, we try to integrate them into the art a little bit so it's a little bit more subtle. Some publishers, like Ravensburger has the big blue triangle that always cuts off one corner, and that's a standard for them. I know I've seen folks kind of complain about Red Raven has series of games that are all set in that same universe. What is it? Now or Never, Above and Below, that series. And one of them, the logo placement on the side is in a different position. Like they're all at the top and one's at the bottom or the other way around. And it's like, thinking about that as your product design of like, if I have a fan who buys all my games and lines them up on the shelf together, do they look good together? Do they make like a complete catalog? Is the logo consistent? Does it look neat? Some people don't care, but some people really, really do. And having a vision for those things sort of over the long term can matter, especially if you're doing a series of games. Like, if I put all of my Catan and Katana expansions together, they should look like a set. They should look like they belong together. They should nest nicely, same size boxes, things like that. That goes into the product design. Even wonky shapes, tins that don't stack as well, they're sturdy, but if it has like a beveled top or, one of the versions of Wonky we did had a box that kind of went like this down the sides, and we were like, this looks really cool on the shelf. Everyone hated it. Like it doesn't slot nicely next to other things in retail. When you put it spine out, it kind of goes in and out down the shelf, so it's hard to read. People who stack games in their game closet, it stacked funny and it didn't balance things out. So it's like, yeah, we were clever, but we didn't think about all those sort of usability things of what is this like when someone owns it? What does it look like on their shelf?
That is terrific, terrific, terrific stuff. Lots and lots of stuff to digest. Really, really appreciate you spending a full hour with us today, Pat. If there are any last minute questions, now is a good time to put them on there. I believe people can find you on social media at Dr. Pat Makes Games, right?
That is correct, yes.
Is that on all the different channels?
Facebook, you'll find me just as me. Search my name, you can find me on there. TikTok, Instagram, those are all at Dr. Pat. I'm not on X, but the other ones, and of course on BGG as well. I have a profile there where we track every game we've made and all the comments and videos and everything that get posted every day, and we try to respond to all those as well. So all those spaces, and then email is just my first initial and last name, so pmarino@usaapply.com.
Perfect. Thanks again for spending the time with us today, Pat. We're going to sign off now. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This will be available sometime in the near future on the Gamma Hub. And if you or someone you know would like to have access to it, all they have to do is be a Gamma member. Everybody, have a great day.